Joe is such a captivating speaker. It's wonderful. You know, he talked about gorillas. At Basis, we practice conscious leadership, which is why we're such a tight team. And one of those things is based around self-awareness and always understanding how you're showing up. And I can say, you know, I've been in ad sales now over, 23 years, 18 of which has been at this company, which I'm very fortunate to be a part of. And I'll just share a personal anecdote. You know, a personal gorilla of mine was, I always thought that this advertising thing in sales was a zero-sum game. For me to win, someone else had to lose. And I would say that shifted probably about 3 years ago. And my whole world moved from a position of scarcity to a position of abundance. And we practice that a lot. You know, and I also want us to look inward at ourselves to figure out what personal gorillas we have that we need to figure out, identify, and get some of those donuts receipts as people. Because again, that's what this industry is all about, is really good people. And I look forward to more of those connections. So our next thing is all about AI. I learned this morning. It's artificial intelligence. Spoiler alert, okay? But we know AI is everywhere. And we recently surveyed our agency and brand leaders around the country to get their take on how AI is impacting their organization and our industry overall. To review these amazing results and share their unique perspective, we pulled together an awesome panel of people to discuss. On stage, we're going to welcome one of my favorite people in the entire world, let alone at this company, our VP of Media and Innovations and Technology, Noor Nasir. She's wonderful. And two of our panelists, Jennifer Das and Albert Thompson. We're going to get you on stage. Noor is going to be the one to give the intro and everything ready to go. So Noor, please come on up here and let's have an awesome panel. Thank you all so much.
God, that introduction, favorite person in the world, wow. Well, thanks everybody. I know it's not your first rodeo hearing about a panel with AI. This is one of probably many, and sometimes when you hear the word AI and somebody talking about it for what feels like the millionth time, you roll your eyes, because a lot of people, when they get on stages, it feels like they just consulted ChatGPT to learn about what AI is, and that it's not ideal. So for that reason, we call this panel AI, the Future of Work, and not the bullshit you keep hearing everywhere else. So with that, I know Mike already mentioned that I'm going to weave in some learnings from our survey results. We've been taking surveys for the last 3 years to see how things are changing as people think differently about what artificial intelligence means and how it's affecting their organization. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple of things to just set the stage for what's been going on with AI. So a couple of points. McKinsey, they found this. Gen AI could automate 60 to 70% of time spent of knowledge tasks, according to one of their reports. Also, workers with AI skills command a 56% wage premium, according to a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers. In sectors most exposed to AI, productivity quadrupled. That's what every leader wants to hear. And finally, well, not finally, second to last, tech media giants and their AI ad tools are threatening agencies, according to the Wall Street Journal. And then besides these points, there's also what are the agencies doing out there, especially the big media holding co's. And one particular point that people have been noticing, and probably many people in the room have been noticing, is WPP's activity in this space. So WPP recently was noted for slashing 7,000 jobs surrounding AI and automation focus, according to Adweek, amongst other publications. What is going on with those people? They're just doing a lot of things over there. So if we want to get some answers on that, maybe...
No shade at all good.
Maybe we'll talk to somebody who knows something about it, such as the Global Chief Operations and Transformation Officer of WPP, Jen Das, who's seated right here. And I'm going to share a little bit about Jen and Albert right now. So let me tell you a little bit about Jen. Jen, I asked her for a bio and she said this is the short version, and it was like 25 lines at least. So let me just pull a little bit from that. Jen has been recognized by the advertising industry for her transformational thought leadership by being named one of the most innovative agency executives by Adweek and a corporate visionary by Synopsys. Jen has spearheaded strategic multi-year visions and pioneered POVs about the changing marketing ecosystem and has led notable client task forces that accelerate transformational work streams in a multifaceted joint transformation roadmap. So just a little bit about Jen. We want to hear about those roadmaps as it pertains to AI. So we're very excited to have you on the panel. And we are just as excited about Albert Thompson, who's seated right next to me. He's the Managing Director of Digital Innovation and a Digital Strategist at Walton Isaacson. For those of you who are not familiar with Walton Isaacson, they were founded by Aaron Walton, who was recently brought onto the American Ad Federation's Hall of Fame last year, Corey Isaacson, and also, fun fact, NBA legend Magic Johnson. Albert, in particular, is widely recognized for his passion for thought leadership. I mean, I feel like when Albert is awake, Albert is sharing thought leadership POV. I didn't tell you this, Albert, but I was on the second floor and I was waiting for my room, and so were you, but you didn't know that I was seated on the other side. He was sharing his POVs with I don't know who about artificial intelligence, and I'm like, we had not actually met. I've talked to Albert a couple of times, but within 3 or 4 words, his first analogy, I'm like, that is Albert Thompson. I know that guy, and I know he's a passionate AI educator. So a couple things about Albert. He has worked on dozens of the most visible brands in the world, including HBO, Hyatt, Merck, Lexus, Amazon, Unilever, Verizon, and AstraZeneca, and many, many more. He's been named one of Adweek's Media All-Stars, and he's spoken at speaking engagements including Digiday, Media Post, Ad Age, Ad Monster, Synopsis, Adweek, ANA, and many, many more. These are truncated biographies by a mile, but with all that, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us, as Albert said. We're really excited to be here and share our thoughts, whether they're good, bad, or in between.
So I want to set things up on the right foot. Tell me, how do each of your roles relate to AI work in your organizations? Let's start with you, Jen.
Yeah, of course. So you can talk about transformation, and actually, in funny story, I tried to get transformation out of my title this time because it's such a buzzword these days. But you can't talk about transformation, whether that's internal or client-facing, without talking about AI, right? AI is everywhere. It's embedded in what we do and what we will continue to do. I think the one thing I always say when I talk about AI is that AI has actually been with us since the 1950s, right? Propensity models say hi. As well as data science, whether that be looking at things that NASA is doing or things that we're doing from an advertising industry perspective. What is new is Gen AI and agentic AI, right? And so leveraging those capabilities in a new and different way for our daily tasks, but also to do, assist, and orchestrate will be really critical in kind of our ways of working moving forward at different maturity levels. So from a human-based perspective, you always want to look at the tasks that humans and talent love to do and make sure that they are supported in that way and are still doing that. Whereas, where they're redundant tasks or things like data entry, that's where, you want to assist or orchestrate. So I think, it's really embedded in the day-to-day, both from a strategic perspective as well as executional.
Fantastic. And Albert, for you, how is it embedded into your day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to zoom out for 2 seconds and then come back in. When I look at artificial intelligence, and it's not my quote, but I thought it was brilliant. They said AI will be programmed with childlike curiosity. So how many people in the room have a toddler who's a boy? So I'm the one who has to tell you that kid is going to be Doogie Howser. So with that comes a tremendous amount of promise, but also responsibility. But you realize the potential that requires governance of all else so that kid becomes the next Brad Pitt and not a Bundy. And when I look at that, you start to say, all right, my job has always been the futurist, to come around the curve, to assess, observe, best word I've heard of the day, that intellectual curiosity, and come back and tell people how much time they have. So that's always been my role as kind of a marketing technologist in the field of play, and I think that's been the biggest thing related to everything artificial intelligence. When I first looked at the subject matter, I went to Wikipedia and I saw 60 definitions of AI. And I'm like, wow, the average person doesn't know 1.5. So I think what the zoom out is to look at what it is and all its derivatives and definitions and really understand the application for you professionally and the business that you sit in. I think that is the simple thing most people still have not done and have been very much captivated by the noise instead of getting in front of it. It's kind of like you can't outsource child development to YouTube. You shouldn't. The cerebral cortex doesn't want YouTube development. It wants mommy. And then you start to look at, okay, how do we harness the potential of these living, breathing mechanisms that can be supercharged and become something symbiotic to something that is sentient like human beings, but not fully. But you understand that why humans have to have their hands on keys the same way you have to have in child development. And in much technology, it is the same thing. It still requires people who have the ability to discern, to operationalize it, maybe weaponize it, and give it proper context to how it seats in the organization. And I think that's a huge part of the conversation to miss. So my role has always been making sense of the technology and its role in the rules of engagement around it, and talking about how it needs to be operationalized. I know I said a mouthful, but that is like the conversation that is absent in most of these rooms.
Fair point there. I'll pull it from there into one of our survey results and then ask you both a question. According to our survey of advertising professionals, 74% of marketers say AI has made them more efficient. How do you distinguish between efficiency gains versus productivity gains? Are they different? And what even are we trying to get out of this? Like, are we out there trying to just get efficiency and productivity? Or are we also reaching for innovation? Or is that farther down the line? So maybe we need to talk about the difference between those things if it's just semantics. But I'd love to hear from you and just like set that table for me, Jen.
Yeah, I think all of us in the room can attest to the fact that whether it's from like Uber leadership or our clients, we're being tasked with efficiency, because to Albert's point, the noise about AI is all about efficiency gain, right? Like the year over year efficiency targets we're getting from clients, hopefully Joe's not in the room somewhere, but is essentially looking at, going from 3 to 5% efficiency year over year to 20 to 30% efficiency year over year because of the noise that we're seeing across the board. I think we have to draw a line in the sand, and usually I'm an advocate for that. Internally as well as externally, there's a difference between efficiency and productivity. We are currently at the spectrum where, there's productivity gains for sure, right? I don't need somebody like spending time or an hour or two doing meeting recaps or, collating data. They should be focused on the insights and looking at the bias of the data and what we can get from it, not necessarily coupling that all together. I was actually talking to Colin yesterday, and I was like, can you imagine a couple of years from now because for the last 20 years that I've been in the industry, we've been talking about taxonomies and data cleanliness and data hygiene. We still do that up front from a brand perspective, but we're actually looking at the delivery from an AI aspect to tell us the kind of taxonomy definitions that are actually being delivered versus what we're looking at up front, and that there's time efficiency there. So I think there's a difference between efficiency, which we're not necessarily hitting the boat on in full transparency, and anybody can attest to this that is on agency side. We are hitting those numbers, but not necessarily all derivative of AI. Sometimes we're looking at different ways from a commercial model perspective to actually hit those numbers. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to get to that efficiency state, but while also building productivity. I think the one thing that I would recommend across the board is that, we always talk about specific roles. Oh, there's a data analyst, there's a project manager. You really need to dig deep. It's way more complex than that, and go down to the activity, because a data analyst is also looking at the insights and, building out decks, not just the data cleanliness and the data hygiene, which AI is really good at. So I think that's where that comes into play on what can we do, what can we, orchestrate, and what can AI assist.
Right before we jump to Albert for his comments on this, WPP is ranked number 1, number 2 agency year over year in terms of largest media holding company in the world. How do you even identify all the areas where you can really see the gains around either efficiency or really productivity, as you were describing it? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I think anyone that's in a holding company can say it's arduous, right? There's a lot of red tape for any holding company to get through to be able to, really synthesize a vision. One of the things that I created earlier this year is this concept of the DOS transformation framework, right? Because in addition to my WPP role, I also built a consultancy earlier this year. And as part of that, the very foundational thing that I always recommend, which is missing 99% of the time, what is the vision? What are we trying to do in a 1 or 2 sentence kind of statement? that we can then build work streams and objectives around, and OKRs and KPIs. But 99% of the time, we're looking at competitors, to Joe's point, or trying to, throw spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks, versus having a very prescriptive vision. So if we start off with the vision, we can actually then synthesize that vision into work streams and be super brutal with, is this what we're doing in service of that vision? I will say for WPP specifically, one of the reasons I joined a few months ago was because I'm really excited about leadership that has been infused both at the OpCo and HoldCo level. Brian Lesser obviously coming in as the CEO of WPP Media and already making changes there. He obviously used to work at InfoSum and oversee InfoSum, not work at, he was the CEO. And then same thing with Cindy Rose coming in as the new CEO of the HoldCo. She came in from Microsoft as a COO. She has a lot of the same ethos from a leadership perspective that I have as far as, AI, change management, but also being human and client-centric first. And it's already a breath of fresh air. I will say, we still need a lot of way to go to have a unified vision. I think we're still synthesizing that, if I'm being honest. But it is a really exciting space to be in and time to be at WPP.
Albert, let's hear from you. You're at a little smaller of a shop, right? You said Walton Isaacson, maybe around 150 folks, but still leaning in heavy with AI. How would you look at the difference between productivity and efficiency versus innovation, and how you're thinking about it at your organization?
Yeah, to me, it's a spectrum. There are people who are just, it's one thing the 4As discovered in my discussion with them is that it's so vast between people who sit in institutions where there's the spoils of riches, and I'll get into that, that's data, and people who just are on a GPT and improving work productivity. So it's productivity that discovers there's efficiencies that gets to the possibility of innovation. And what you may find is that those are worlds apart, and you will find that between people in an organization, people in different categories, the number one market leader and that's the difference between the number two and number three, between a HoldCo and a smaller shop. And I think the acknowledgement has to be that when they looked at the difference between lower class and upper class people, they use GPT very differently. Lower class people use it to complete tasks. Upper class people looked at it as a means of facilitating ideation. There's a huge difference. That's almost the difference between the rich and people who live around the poverty line, and just the overall mental capacity and philosophy of around everything. But what we find in business, there are people who carry lower class mentalities around large language models and people who carry high class ones. Like, how are we going to weaponize this to compete? And what people need to understand is they're going to have to start to level up to the promise of what it is, the same way you do, and I give the analogy around child development, that this entity could be something amazing. And I think a lot of what people are doing is their internal fear mongering around what this means. So they're holding it close to the cards, meaning they're not telling the boss how they're using it, because they're like, I shouldn't be using this. I was supposed to know how to do this anyway, and this is part of why you hired me in the first place. So I'm not telling you that I'm filling in gaps using tools.
Albert, can I interrupt you for a quick second? He already distinguished between lower class thinking and higher class thinking. Some folks are probably a little offended. It's like, I'm really trying to use it for both. People think they're using it for ideation. How do you distinguish between folks who are using it for more of efficiency / productivity gains versus ideation? And I think people type in like, help me find 10 new ways to do so-and-so, and the perception is that is in fact ideation. Tell me why it's not.
100%. And look, I give that not as my language, but the language is used, but that is the difference in mindset. But the promise and possibility is what it can power in terms of intellectual wealth. And I think what some people are looking to do is, I'm just trying to balance the checkbook right now, instead of how am I going to have a conversation with Charles Schwab? And that's a huge difference between the two. And what I'm saying is there is a starting point, but I think people need to look at an upward trajectory that is far greater based upon the fact that these models are built with 1,600 to 16,000 IQ. That's like weaponized intelligence if harnessed correctly. And it's not without the hallucinations, but people need to understand the ceiling is very high. If you can see it, why are you shooting so low? A baseline is just understanding and having some digital fundamentals. You need some AI fundamentals. You need to understand the derivative AI, how these models are built, what is possible to figure out where it can take you and take the enterprise. People aren't doing that. They're still afraid of telling someone they used it to write their resume, or they're using it to write some copy. what it's doing is unlocking parts of the brain. They talk about a Will.i.am, his strong left and right brain. He can operate the two hemispheres at a high level. So he can work with Cisco and Intel's as well, and then he can go create a dope track we're all dancing to. Most people can't do that. AI now has the ability to level up both sides of the hemispheres. People need to start to tap and exercise that, because you can train the mind to expand in things you didn't have capability. So there's a stopgap being used to get to greater productivity and greater efficiency. Let's say you sucked at time management, task management, to the fact that your spouse knows you suck at time. Well, all of a sudden AI makes you a player in that game of, I can better use my time. That's the beginning. So now if you have time back, the most precious resource, now what can I dream of and innovate and imagine and actually bring it to reality? People need to sit with the tools and start to rethink and reimagine themselves in the enterprise they sit in. That is just not happening, because that thing of intellectual curiosity isn't happening at scale. And a lot of that sits on the notion of basic observation. What can I fix and shore up me personally or within the organization and organizational dynamics for which I'm sitting in? Like, that is just a basic mindset of how to work. And that's what I say when I say childlike curiosity, and it's a boy. That boy is on everything. He's climbing over everything. He's pulling on the dog, trying to cut the dog's hair. Next thing, he's in the yard. He's in the bushes. He's rolling around. He's jumping off furniture. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's a tremendous amount of energy to be harnessed, and that's the potential of these platforms to do the same. But people need to sit with the power of them to start to actualize them. So they move from the lower class mindset of, I just need to get through the next 5 minutes or my day, to what are we going to build that's missing in the intellectual stack or business stack. Like Amazon is like, stuff is missing in the business stack. Let's go get a grocery store. Let's go get a drugstore. Let's launch a streaming platform. We used to sell books, but all we're looking at is what's missing. You should look at what's missing in the intellectual stack and start to figure out how you're going to build this and how these tools help close the gap that you were never going to be able to resource and close the gap, because A, you don't know how, or B, you just never had the money or time to do. And I think that's a bit of the power of moving down the spectrum from mere productivity gains to really, can we take the invention and innovate and out-innovate the people next to us?
And I would say, from my perspective, operationalizing the technicalities of it, right? Not just the LLMs, but looking at how MCPs can really be infused into the LLMs, because LLMs only know what they know. They're very broad, but they're also biased, right? Because they don't have a full picture of the data and, the cultural aspects like we were talking about yesterday. So, leveraging MCPs, which are essentially, if I had to think about, parity with some of the traditional data and tech stacks, it's like the new version of an API. So how can I infuse different types of data sets and different types of knowledge into the LLMs or into my own custom LLM via MCP?
And Jen, the MCP acronym stands for?
It's kind of like a multifaceted protocol. So it's essentially, built into the LLM kind of workspace. If it's done right, it can limit the hallucinations because it's infusing data that is not necessarily inherent to the LLMs, but it's also, looking at different types of data set that might be more accurate. We were talking about this yesterday, and I don't usually say this, but I will. I'm actually Guyanese. I was born in New York, in Brooklyn. My grandparents and my parents are Guyanese. From an ethnicity perspective, there's East Indian, there's Portuguese, there's Spanish. I listen to all those things, eat all of those foods. Nobody's going to know that, right? From an identity-based solution perspective, or even from an LLM perspective. So how do we look at infusing different types of data sets, different types of data signals into the LLMs to make them not only more powerful, but more accurate throughout the consumer journey? So I definitely agree with that. I think the other thing there is that, it doesn't have to be a holding company proprietary platform, right? And I think that's one of the things that that's also a human hallucination. Yes, we spend multi-million dollars on building out our own platforms at a holding company level, but I had a strategist that used ChatGPT for a deck outline, and then used Perplexity to help with some of the content, and then use Claude for some ideation. You can be scrappy, and you should be scrappy in these type of areas so that you can experiment, evolve. I like to say what's old is new again. So for those of us that have been in product development for quite some time, the old DevOps kind of circle, that's coming back, but in the lens of AI.
Yeah, one of the things I want to add to that, because I'm glad you talked about identity. Human identity is based on a plurality of our identities. The fact that we could be one construct, one archetype in one domain, very different in another domain. So the average dad doing soccer mom duties is not the soccer mom and dad trim. but he's adopting the sensibilities of what is expected in that role, largely what the wife told him he needs to do and how to show up, so not to mess it up. But he's a very different dude when he throws on an Eagles jersey or a Cowboys jersey. I'm not a Cowboys fan, people. So when you look at that, there's a plurality of the identity. If we're going to build machines to replicate human intuition and thinking, they have to be programmed with the same plurality of identity, i.e., the plurality of information inputs, which means a hell of a lot of them, and a lot of different ones from different perspectives. So it balances out what you talked about, the bias, but it has the adaptability and flexibility to read, interpret, discern, and think. So I think that's the other thing missing, is that you have to look at the construct of human behavior. Largely, a lot of it can't be explained, even when you talk about human consciousness, but you got to start programming machines and mirroring it the same way that people can code switch, as they say, and be very different things in very different circles and move in and out of very different circles. And that conversation isn't happening when people put the machines in front of them and start to look at how do we build it, because most of them are just trying to increase productivity to put out more social media copy. And there's nothing wrong with that. That has to be done. That's a part of it. But the upstream possibilities are far greater than nailing the right Twitter post, or sorry, X post, whatever we call it today.
So we're spinning in a couple different directions, guys. I forgot that I have the questions that I want to keep up there, so people are probably like, wait, what's the question again? What? So we're gonna move into this, but I think I do want to ask this question before we worry about this next one. We talked about WPP doing the acquisition of InfoSum, and there's been this cookieless future conversation forever in terms of addressability, and that we need this great grand savior to help us so that we can really lean into addressability and targeting in a meaningful way. But you just talked about being Guyanese. We've talked historically, Albert, about these LLMs not knowing who we are. What are our expectations for AI to help us identify this in meaningful ways, in accessible ways for people who work for small to mid-sized agencies? Maybe that's a question. Maybe Albert, you want to give us like a tight answer on that, as far as turning to some of these tools and having expectations of these LLMs that have not suited us today.
Yeah. So the LLMs are about partnerships. So the average, let's say, multicultural research entity does not have partnerships with OpenAI, with Latimer, with Perplexity, with Claude, with none of them. So they don't have the information. They don't have the basic foundation, which means they will hallucinate and come up with some sort of linguistic language that sounds sexy, but if you are of any culture and you just query your own, you realize this is total BS. So you have to understand how they're built. They require partnerships on the back end as data sourcing. So when you start to do queries and you look at the sources, don't read what they say, look at the sources. You'll see sources that are 40 years old. You're like, they don't even have understanding of the modern anything, in any context. I think the other thing you have to understand is, what does AI read? It reads press releases, static web pages. It reads blog posts. Meaning it's not reading your branded entertainment integration you just executed at an event or in some long form content. So when you look at what it reads and interprets, it reads what is old school. You have to go back to the 2000s when we were trying to index every web page on the internet versus the dynamic waterfall pages. That's a totally different construct than where we were accelerating to in the rich media era. When you understand what it's reading and what it requires to have robust information, you can quickly see the gaps in any of them. And that is what people don't understand. They think there's truth, but there's no truth when the sourcing isn't based on truth.
So I'll hop into our next question over here, which is about agentic AI. And it feels like that's what we're talking about. But I don't know that we always distinguish between, is agentic AI just different than AI? Is this just a new wave of artificial intelligence? Can I use those terms interchangeably? So let me know the answer to that. Maybe that's a yes or a no. And then, when should I be expecting it to manifest in a meaningful way to affect my agency? And what function will it provide to me first? What's the first thing it should be delivering my agency? If I'm going to prioritize it, if every person in this room should prioritize something, what should that thing be?
Yep. So I'll start off with that one. I think from my perspective, you should not just use blanket AI. as a statement or a term. We already talked a little bit about the fact that AI in general and machine learning have been in place since the 1950s. I think we use AI too broadly when we're talking about it these days, which is why it gets super confusing. A lot of the terminology and the newness and the noise is actually around agentic AI and Gen AI. Using agents to kind of mimic human behavior, and then using Gen AI to create something, whatever that something is. There are very specific use cases for both agentic AI and Gen AI. From a Gen AI perspective, at least at the Holdco level, and Albert can chime in from a smaller agency perspective, we have been using agentic AI first with the assist. So if you think about the assist you and orchestrate aspect, I think it's really important to, first of all, democratize AI throughout the organization. An idea or a great use case can come from somebody that is, currently hands-on keyboard, that planner that wants to get into, analysis like Joe was talking about, all the way up through leadership. Actually, the first pitch meeting I was in at WPP, Mark Reed wanted to show the platform. I was like, I don't think that's the best kind of use of your time in this meeting, but it's through the line, right? And so, being able to leverage that holistically is really important. But also having the psychological safety. One of the things Joe was talking about that really resonated with me earlier is this bit about curiosity and being able to experiment. But the human aspect of that is that, especially with the landscape today and holding companies and agencies throughout, there needs to be psychological safety in order to be able to do that, because not everyone's comfortable with being okay to make a mistake. They think they have to be perfect because there is so much pressure on talent, both from a staffing perspective as well as expectation perspective. So I do think that's going to be really important. I have one-on-one meetings with my team, my direct reports on a weekly basis, and I actually celebrate the failures, right? There's something to learn when we fail. I want you to try something, fail fast, learn fast, fix it, and let's do something else. From a Gen AI perspective, there are very specific use cases as well. We are already using Gen AI to leverage, deck creation, to be able to look at insight generation. And I was actually telling Albert yesterday, in my very first week at WPP, I was actually really pleasantly surprised with the fact that there was a hero creative in the platform. A user went in and did a AI prompt, and it created thousands of assets in real time, in seconds. So if you think about, the executional aspect of that, or the commercial model aspect of that, can you imagine a couple of years from now, once we get clients on board, instead of charging them that FTE model or the hourly rate that was talked about earlier, looking at, hey, I'm saving you XYZ from a CPA cost per asset perspective. I'm just going to take a little sliver of that savings, and all those savings go to your bottom line. So I think there are very applicable use cases. I think it's happening in pockets, if I'm being honest, right? Folks that are more adaptable, already kind of dabbling in it, it's much easier to move that forward. And we're seeing that with particularly those nimble, scrappier agencies in the holding company or teams versus, at scale just yet.
I'm going to move us to our next question here, and start off with this point. According to the survey that Basis ran, if 79% of firms plan to invest in automation in the next year, how do organizations avoid runaway deployment without governance? Because I think there is not a shadow of doubt that people are told not to do things, and inevitably, if tools are accessible, they are doing the things they're not supposed to do, so long as access is there. Or to your point about the psychological safety piece, sometimes people are afraid, but I think there's also a lot of activity they're not supposed to be doing. So what really is an answer to this question? And I'll throw it to you first, Jen, but then we'll go to Albert as well. What should you do to make sure that the rules, the risks are being tabulated for, and that your talent and your team is doing what they're supposed to when they're using these tools?
Yeah, I never kind of snuff at, being able to dabble, whether you tell me or not. At the end of the day, I think there are, hard and fast governance, compliance kind of frameworks that we have in place, whether that's looking at the type of use cases or functions that we have in AI, the quality control mechanisms that we have, or even further downstream as we're looking at partnerships, right? Albert was talking about partnerships earlier. When we ink partnerships now, it's not just the media investment or the media saving, it's the media investment, the data that I can get from that media investment, the technology capabilities, which Mike has heard me talk quite a lot about. So it's multifaceted at this point to be able to fuel all of our objectives. But I also think, there's the opposite effect where we have, and I'm sure you guys are seeing it in your MSAs with your clients, we have very hard and fast rules on AI compliance and governance that are contractually obligated. And so being able to not only put those compliant mechanisms in place internally, but also as we're building those partnerships, right? Things like new IoTs and Cs, a new kind of AI governance team, all of those things come into play, and with very strict kind of quality controls throughout the process. So it's new, it's exciting, but it is moving much faster than, to your point, digital cookies or identity has, and will continue to change the landscape.
We're going to cut to Albert's answer, but I just want to let everybody know we do want to take some questions. So in about 5 to 7 minutes, we're going to switch to the audience. So if there is anything you want to ask, either Albert or Jen, please think of some questions now. But same question to you, Albert. What are your thoughts on making sure that deployment isn't, running away without governance being considered?
Yeah, I think a lot of the smart players who are leading the conversation have looked at governance like anything else. Necessary, put in structure, create an AI council internally, cross-discipline, cross-departments. You're not going to deploy this effectively with silos in the silos that exist. It's not going to happen because these machines have the capacity to move across and they're going to pull in other disciplines and domains without even trying. I think what everyone in this room needs to understand is if you look at the Deloitte model, the Accenture model, going from 14 teams and management consultancies to 4 to 5 with an AI agent tells you what the new configuration will be, because 14 didn't make sense because that was one of the donut receipts we talked about of having all those people bill more hours. So that's done. What that means is, and I'm gonna use Last Samurai analogy, a small agency can pull in a whole co close enough for a sword. It used to be they were with warning within reach. But if the configuration is 4 to 5 people with tools, AI powered, that means you can compete with a whole co that has to have the same configuration because they have way too much fat. That means you actually have an opportunity to get on the beach, as they say, win the beach, to get to the city center to win the client opportunity. You need to embrace that holistically, but right now, because that has never existed probably in this industry, maybe since a half century when every agency was small. But now there's actually an opportunity to draw them close and compete because you can use tools as the gap, an intellectual gap, an executional gap, whatever gap it is you're trying to fill, looking at the points of friction between your model, the whole co model, and the client's model. So take that very seriously as an opportunity, but you're not going to get there without governance and thinking it through, understanding what the models and how they're built, what their deficiencies are. Look, I told somebody, I think Jack and I were talking, you're going to have to look at these models and lift the hood and determine whether that's a V8 or or 4-cylinder. And you're going to have to know how you're going to supercharge that car to give it race grade quality to compete on a track. That's where we are, but you have to be able to look at and understand what that is. And you have to have an internal framework of not only assessing the ability of the enterprise to level up with the machines, but looking at each of these machines, because there are 2,000 plus AI-powered tools for marketing alone. Who has time to go through all that? But someone needs to be sitting and synthesizing and making sense of it and figuring out how does this allow us to weaponize our resource ability because of people we didn't have to hire, that bigger shops could always hire in the spoils of riches of having money and be able to build those hours, that we can now seat alongside human intelligence with human governance and oversight. And again, I know I said a mouthful, but that is the playbook today.
I have a quick follow-up question. You said somebody has to look under the hood and figure out if it's a V4 or a V6 or a V8. Who's supposed to do that? Who's responsible for looking at these LLMs? If you're at a smaller organization, that person may not actively exist at your company, and it's everybody's not WPP. They're not spending hundreds of millions of dollars finding talent and new organizations that they're going to merge into their active company. They're thinking really hard on who's appropriate to bring in. So from a small organization perspective, what's kind of your quick thought on what that hiring should look like? When you have these tasks that need to take place, it's easy to say, it's hard to find the right person to bring in to do a series of them. So what's your quick take there, Albert?
The people who can look at stuff and call bullshit and break things down are the best. And it doesn't really matter who they are. Because the building blocks, a lot of them are still the same from when the internet was first constructed. And I think we're overthinking it like these are foreign objects. And at the end of the day, it's some of the same building blocks beneath them. So that's just people whose mindset you need. Yes, does that mean you need whoever your CTO, whoever oversees your technology? I don't care if it's a person who's making sure your web servers don't go down. Great person. Whoever is your digital strategist, another good person. Whoever's your strategist, another good person. You need a finance person who can look at the money and say, some of this is just a waste of money. I mean, you just need people who are very good at picking things apart and asking the questions, who can then pull other people into the frame, even outside the organization, to close the gap on what they think they are seeing to validate that this is what we are seeing. I think people are thinking they need to over-engineer. Stop looking at what billionaires are doing. They live in a different world. It's almost a different species. You can't follow Sam Altman and ask him, how do we approach this? You can't look at a $1 trillion valuation company, which is, by the way, way overvalued in an AI world. And so let's do what they're doing. A lot of this is the same common sense you did to look at which search engine was built better than the next one, because there used to be 20 of them, and now there are 4 of them. I think people are getting caught in the noise. Less noise, more signal in making decisions in an AI world.
Yeah, and I would say 2 things to that. I know I was talking to some of the folks in the room earlier about there's going to need to be a different way of working from a talent perspective moving forward, right? So historically, we've either had generalists that are, super kind of high level orchestrating things, or what I call T-shaped talent, right? It's folks that go really deep into one specialism or vertical. And what I have built a career on and see more frequently and have advocated for throughout from a L&D perspective and a talent perspective is this concept of M-shaped talent, right? Not necessarily generalist, not necessarily deep into one specialism, but have enough knowledge to be able to go into enough specificity across multiple facets, right? My first degree was in finance. Can I talk to a CFO about the bullshit that we need to cut out? For sure. At the end of the day, it is, being confident in the fact that it's okay to learn as you go, but having a very kind of clear L&D perspective on building that M-shaped talent of the future will not only be more efficient from a holistic staff plan perspective internally, as we're looking to resource, but also be able to guide the future with like AI as well as the other things that are, in our docket.
As we head over into questions, I just need 1 or 2 quick, like cable news style answers for these next 2 questions. So real quick here, guys.
I told you we would take up the 50 minutes.
Yeah, it's
those
wild.
Those are filibuster responses, right?
So will AI deepen the leadership versus practitioner optimism gap or help close it? That's another one of our big survey results, is that close to 90% of people in executive leadership positions are thrilled about the potential of AI, while it's under 70% for people at the director level or below. But director level is already, we have directors in this room right now. They're also in leadership positions, if not executive leadership positions. So as you go further down the line, that enthusiasm can dwindle. What are your quick thoughts there? Do we think this is going to deepen, or do we think that we're going to close this gap?
Yeah, I think we have about 4 minutes left, so I will take it really cable style, and happy to chat with anyone after. But I think there are different competing goals, right? Leadership wants to be able to appease both the Wall Street as well as our clients to be more efficient, and is leveraging AI as a way to do that. At the end of the day, the practitioners are like, how does this help me get my job done? How does this help me when I'm supposed to have 100 people or 10 people on my team and I only have 5? Right? At the end of the day, we have significant staffing gaps across the board, whether that's because of different types of skill set needs or what have you. And so being able to close that gap on a day-to-day perspective is really critical. But I do think there needs to be kind of a coming together of those 2 things and how they overlap and intersect. And roles like mine are usually the ones that are being able to bridge that gap throughout.
I'll give this final question to you, actually, Albert, just so that we can switch over here. What do agencies need to change in recruiting, onboarding, and mentorship if you have this talent, this junior talent out there that does have, in fact, a greater AI fluency?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is look at the set point of entry. So it was lower, and advertising's bar, this is not commercial investment banking, was far lower. Lawyers higher. So when you look at other pharmaceutical, high. Advertising was not. The set point has now started to raise, and you need to be very clear what that is, because what you're looking at is the requirement of greater development of resourcing coming in particular with an AI fluence. It's kind of like when social media happened. Who's the young kid who works on our team? Yeah, let him manage TikTok and Instagram because he's on it all day. But what happens is leadership never understood the rules of engagement of tech, of people who've seen more technology in a lifetime, to tell them how to look at putting it to use for the enterprise. They just gave it to them. Okay, you can't do that with AI. It's way too powerful, has way too much promise. So you establish a new set point of what the requirement and skill is going to be, and to what degree people have played around with the various technologies to understand their limitations. Young people, bless you, are great at breaking the machine. You have to take it to its limit to realize it can do no more, but what if we built more on top of it? And then start to speak around how you need to be trained to come in over top of it now. So if Jasper, that can create copy, a lot of agencies use for social media, then someone needs to understand Jasper's ability and have a little bit more imagination than software, the SaaS it does itself. The set point is now raised in coming into a social media job. It needs to be that prescriptive, and everyone else needs to understand they now need to move up their own individual set points on that topic. And I give that as one example. And again, that moves you from productivity set point to efficiency to real innovation and transformation. And that's where people need to start to look at the enterprise and how it starts to bump everything up as an industry. And look, you could just look at other categories where it's like you got to have this degree and that degree to get the base level job. Advertising didn't have that. Well, it has that now. Get you an AI certification and you can get the base level job. These are simple principles. We could just look at other sectors and do the same thing.
Sorry, I have one quick build, and I promise it'll be quick. What I've found successful as far as implementing AI and platforms across multiple holding companies, and even in a product development role at another ad tech company, is it has to be fun, right? At the end of the day, there are internal goals that I have to leadership that I obviously keep close to the chest because I don't want to scare everybody on what those are. But, something as simple as like, hey, do one thing in AI a day and putting that up in, a public area to say, here are the top 5 performers for the week. Here are the top 5 client usages for the week. That actually goes a really long way. And I was very pleasantly surprised with how well that worked on gaining adoption within less than 3 months. So make it fun, gamify it, do lots of like learning and training development, but also workshop-y type things, and you'll see the difference in a very fast and quick way.
We may have room for like, you got somebody?
No, we don't.
We don't. Oh, it's time.
We're at time.
It's time. Okay. So, you know what? I mismanaged everyone's expectations. If you have a question, it will not be addressed right now. But
Albert and I are here. So
but Albert and Jen are here. We hope that as like the day goes on, that a lot of folks will make time to talk with them. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room have many more opinions about AI. So we're excited to continue the conversation later down the road. But I'll leave it there for now. And thank you both for the time on stage.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.